I was just a dreamer, and I just needed to keep moving forward. Everything that I had built started to fall apart. I was at the lowest point of my life. I didn't understand how this happened. If I could wake up every day and do what I loved, what would that be? How to be deeply connected to your work. The first, find what you're good at. Second, do what you love. Third, I'd love to tell you a story. When I was young, I always dreamed of being an explorer. I was that kid in class at school who would stare out the window and would not pay attention to the science teacher, but instead I would be dreaming of discovering lost cities and diving deep into oceans looking for treasure. I also dreamed of using my life to fighting for injustice in the world. It was just who I was. I was just a dreamer. However, as I got older, through a series of events, I ended up stopped dreaming. I ended up becoming more practical. The major event which led me down this new road happened on July 10th, 1996. I heard a knock on my door early in the morning. I was surprised. So I got up, I opened the door, and standing there was my Uncle Mike. He looked at me and he said, "Jeffrey, your father has died." And in shock, I looked back at him and I said, "What happened?" And he said he committed suicide. I remember that whole period, that whole few weeks feeling like a blur, kind of like that I was in some dream. I was starting college in a few months, and I recall that I knew that I had to grow up really quickly, that I had to get realistic. I had to find a job, I needed to make money, and I just needed to keep moving forward. So I started college, I got involved in college politics, I started getting good grades, I was on the tennis team, and I did everything that most college people used to do. And I just kept running. I kept trying to achieve, trying to succeed. A few years after college, I started working on Wall Street. I had a great job, I got married, bought a house, and I just kept running. I kept achieving. At the age of 32, I had everything that anyone would ever want. I had a beautiful wife. I had an incredible job for someone my age. I had my first daughter, who was just born a year before, and an amazing home. But something was off. I couldn't quite pinpoint it. Something was just not right. And over the next year, everything that I had built started to fall apart. My marriage crumbled. I lost my home. I had no place to live. And this job that I had worked so hard for, while I was holding on to it, it became increasingly clear that it's not what I was supposed to be doing in life. I was at the lowest point of my life. I didn't understand how this happened. I was angry, I felt shame, and I didn't know a way forward. And then two events happened in my life. The first, at the age of 32, I went on the first hike of my life. It took place 1 hour north of New York City, right along the Hudson River. I was with my sister and brother-in-law that day. And we stepped into those woods and I went on fire. The feeling of being in nature, the connection, the beauty of being in that mountain that day. The camaraderie within our group, the feeling of being supported, something about working together to achieve a goal. And reaching my first summit. Even though it was only 300 feet in elevation, for me, it felt like I was standing on the top of Mount Everest. I got home that day and I knew I had found something. I found something I had deeply connected to. I started to climb all over the United States, then all over the world. And adventure was transforming my life. It was an opportunity for me to address fears that I've always had. It was an opportunity for me to create community, something that I deeply longed for. Not soon after this experience, my manager at Citigroup sent me to a leadership conference for executives in the company. And I pushed back a little bit. I didn't want to go that day, but he encouraged me. And when I got there, I saw the pamphlet that a man named Robert Swan was going to be speaking. It listed him as a British polar explorer, the first man in history to walk to both the North and South Poles, and a big climate change activist. So I was curious. He stepped on stage, and for 1 hour, he regaled us with stories of amazing adventures to the South Pole and to the North Pole. He talked about his failures and his triumphs. But what was so remarkable about Robert was the way that he lived. He lived with passion. He lived with heart. And as I shook his hand at the end of the speech, and I said thank you, I thought to myself, I want to live like this guy. I want to live like Robert. I want to live through my heart. Over the next year, while I was in banking, I spent time thinking about if I could wake up every day and do what I loved, what would that be? And I thought of three things in the process of finding out what you should be doing for your work, how to be deeply connected to your work. The first, find what you're good at. Second, do what you love. Third, find fulfillment in your work. For me, I reflected first on the first point. What am I good at? I knew I was very good at taking people around places, showing them the places that I loved. I had done that during college. I had shown people around the college campuses that I loved. It's something that brought me so much joy. I was great at bringing people together as part of community. When I was in banking, I would always organize roundtables and events for our group and for the industry. And I was very good at managing risk. I was a portfolio manager for 7 years in banking. And it was something that I felt very strongly about. Second, what do I love? Well, when I wrote down all my list, all the things that I loved, 3 things stood out. I loved adventure, obviously. But secondly, I really loved history. I loved history. I'm a huge history buff. And then lastly, I love storytelling. Especially those stories in history where people do the impossible. I'm a sucker for movies like Braveheart and Gladiator, where people rise up from these very difficult situations. And then lastly, fulfillment. What fulfills me? I love helping people see how strong they are, how powerful they are. I love helping people get to the places of their dreams. So I took these 3 things and I drew a matrix, and I said, if I could create a company out of this, what would it look like? So I decided to create an adventure travel company that focused on taking people back in time and showing them history's greatest stories. And on the side, while I was in banking, I worked nights and weekends and built this company. We launched in 2014 with 3 tours, one in Nepal, one in Alaska, and one in Chile. And we had some trouble initially for the first year with sales, but eventually things started to pick up. And it was happening. This dream of mine was coming true. And I noticed during the day how different I felt than during night. During the day, I felt low energy. I was not connected to my work, but at night I was passionate about what I was doing. So I kept going with it. I kept fighting harder. I hoped one day I could leave my job and run this full time. And then as fate had it, in 2016, 4 years after I first met him, a series of events took place and I wound up in a restaurant in New York City with Robert Swan. He told me he had been running these sea expeditions for young climate change leaders to Antarctica every year. He would bring young leaders from over 30 countries, 100 each year, to Antarctica to train them about sustainability and climate change, to train them on leadership so they can return home and become advocates for the environment. He needed a partner. He needed a partner with someone with finance experience, someone with travel experience, and someone who knew risk management. It was a perfect fit, and we began working together. Our relationship and partnership flourished, and we started taking these ships of people every year. I was so inspired by how Robert was using adventure to help with major social, political, and environmental issues in the world. It actually helped me change the direction of my company to go deeper into what I was connected into. In college, I was class president for 3 years. I always loved fighting for people. When I was young, I was that dreamer who wanted to help with injustice in the world, and I was now able to do it through my travel company. Robert and I expanded our mission. We started working in Iceland with the environmental minister, taking members of corporations from around the world to Iceland to teach them about renewable energy and sustainability. Then Robert's son and I, Barney Swan, who's also an explorer environmentalist, started taking groups of people up Mount Kilimanjaro. And beforehand, we began working with Roots and Shoots, which is Jane Goodall's Global Youth Foundation, and planting thousands and thousands of trees to help deal with the issue of deforestation. I was so inspired by our work. I was so committed to it. And fortunately, in 2018, with all that hard work and all that reflection and the courage to change, I finally left banking to run my company full-time. As you all think about what you want to do in your lives, and you're searching for connection, I think I recommend to go through that exercise that I did, to think about what you're good at. You're given those gifts for a reason. You're given those talents for a reason. Use them. Don't waste them. The world needs you. It needs your talents. Secondly, find what you love. Find what excites you. What is that thing that brought your heart to fire when you were young, that put a smile on your face? There's a reason for it. Do it. Make it happen. And fulfillment. What fulfills you? It could be helping people build homes. It could be teaching a language. Whatever it is, it's in you for a reason. So use it. And if you combine those three things, I think it'll help you find what you're looking for. On the ship that Robert and I took to Antarctica in 2018, after a long day, I walked to the back of the ship and I leaned over the railing and I looked out into the ocean. And I reflected on our group and how far I've come. And I thought to myself, I remembered that little boy who dreamed of being an explorer, who dreamed of finding lost treasure, and who dreamed of helping the world. I had found him again. He was back. If I was able to do it, I know that all of you can as well. Good luck, and thank you.
Tell us what you think about this video and don't forget to like, share and subscribe.